Hello there. You know, when I was growing up, there was a game called Fish. It was a card game. And that was the last time I heard game and fish and game put together. But today we're going to hear it again because we're talking to somebody from the Fish and Game Department. Welcome.
Thank you.
I have with me Lieutenant Mark Crossland, who's with the State California Department of Fish and Game, right? It's the department.
That's correct.
Of the state.
Department. That's correct. It's a State Department.
And you are here, though, in San Luis Obispo.
I am. I'm headquartered here in San Luis Obispo County. I'm actually a lieutenant that operates a patrol boat offshore, and we work actually between Monterey and the Channel Islands.
So that's in the bumpy part of the water. It's not in the calm bay that we look at here.
No, we actually, our jurisdiction extends out to 200 miles, so we do cover some ground out there.
Where do you keep your boat?
We keep it in Morro Bay, adjacent to the Coast Guard station.
Oh, so one of the boats there would be yours, and they're not all theirs. Would you go out for the same type of things that they do ever?
We do. We have a memorandum of understanding with the Coast Guard, and we operate on the water at all hours, and we assist them with rescues and anything else they need at any time.
Oh, now see, there you have another thing that I never knew. Maybe you never knew either. But it's like we had the Coast Guard here, and we found out the Coast Guard actually goes to war, and you don't go to war.
Not
other
like
countries.
The Coast Guard.
Not like the Coast Guard.
Not with other countries, that's correct.
All right. Now, how many are stationed here in San Luis Obispo County?
Within the county proper, we have 5 field wardens currently working, and then we have 2 supervising lieutenants in that same area.
Okay, field warden. Now, what is a field warden?
A field warden is a state peace officer. They're entrusted to enforce really all codified law, but their primary function is to enforce laws that govern the take of our resources, pollution, and so forth.
The take of your resources?
That's correct.
That's fish and game.
That would be fish and game.
Okay, now, I think fish is a fairly simple definition. It stays in water.
Right.
All right, if it's in the water, it's a fish. Is a clam a fish?
A clam's a fish, by definition, you bet.
By that definition, anything that grows in the water. Okay.
Pretty much any aquatic organism would qualify, although there are invertebrates and so forth that are inland as well. So I work primarily in the marine environment, but nonetheless, any of our aquatic resources, anything that's found both offshore and in the inland environment are things that we would be entrusted with enforcing regulations and ensuring their protection.
Now that's Lopez Lake too?
That would include any of the reservoirs like Lopez Lake.
Even though that's a county reservoir?
Even though that's a county reservoir. Again, the game wardens are state peace officers, so they can pretty much go anywhere within the state of California to enforce those laws.
Game warden, that's another question. What is game?
Game really encompasses a number of things. I think most people traditionally think of deer, wild pig, turkey, upland game such as quail, for example. All of those animals, all those critters are part of what's considered game, and it's actually classified within the Fish and Game Code.
Now, somebody said to me that game was something that you can eat. Varmints are the ones you don't eat. I mean, Fish and Game does not cover coyotes.
Fish and Game covers coyotes. In fact, the department is vested with the management of all resources within California. So we're entrusted to ensure the protection of all animals, aquatic life, and so forth. Okay,
then the person who gave me that definition was wrong.
May have been.
That, yeah, all these things are game. They're not game, and game is not something you just shoot and eat.
Not necessarily, but for the most part, skunks are not game.
Aha, so skunks are not. What else is with a skunk is not a game?
There are a list of animals that are considered non-game.
All right, so you don't regulate them.
Oh, yes, we do. And that's my point. We oversee and essentially enforce provisions that govern all the animals, and both mammals, birds, and so forth throughout the state of California.
All right, now what laws do you enforce? Federal and state and county, any of them?
We enforce all the laws. Again, as state peace officers, we're entrusted to enforce all law. So game wardens not only are involved in, say, hunting and fishing and commercial fisheries, for example, they're also assisting other law enforcement agencies with arrests of bank robbers and convicted felons and drug dealers and the like. So we get involved in a lot of different law enforcement that I think people traditionally don't think of as you know, game warden work.
Well, there's laws, the fishing laws. There's laws set about fishing. You know, where you can't fish permits. You have to get fishing permits, right? Sometimes.
Well, commercially, yes.
Okay, and, how about regular?
Well, as far as the sport takes concern, you would require, if you're 16 or older, a sport fishing license.
Okay, if you're going to go out off the pier, you don't need it.
Certain piers are designated public piers, and no, you would not need a license there. But in general, if you're going to fish, say, for example, Lopez Lake, or you're going to fish out in the ocean, you would need to have a sport fishing license to do that.
And you would oversee that?
We would oversee that.
The laws would be set on it by some other entity. You don't set laws?
No, we do not set laws. The laws are set by two bodies, really. One, the legislature, and enact laws via the Fish and Game Code. And then the other would be through the Fish and Game Commission, which also oversees a variety of resource-related issues throughout California.
Okay, now, what is the Fish and Game Commission? That's your boss?
Yeah, the Fish and Game Commission is a separate entity from the Department of Fish and Game that oversees, like I said, just a whole array of issues as it relates to wildlife, whether it be habitat, whether it be commercial fishing, sport fishing, non-game animals, the possession of wildlife in general, all governed by the Fish and Game Commission.
And the Fish and Game Department is a department.
Fish and Game Department is a department. It comes under the larger umbrella of the Resources Agency.
But it doesn't come under the Fish and Game Commission?
No, we do not. We do not operate under the Fish and Game Commission. That is pretty much an advisory board, and those members are usually picked by the governor, and they oversee a whole myriad of regulations that govern the take of fish. For example, I mentioned commercial fishing and so forth. And they're meeting several times a year to oversee these regulatory changes, and they can, in fact, enforce more stringent requirements on, say, for example, the take of commercial fish.
Okay, so
type of thing.
Your Fish and Game Department would not decide how much fish can be taken. They would be decided by the commission. They would then say, you guys go out there and make sure it's done this way.
Yeah, essentially, we're the agency that would carry out the directives, whether it be regulatory or otherwise. So, for example, if a new law was established, regarding the take of a certain species offshore, then those laws would either go through the legislature or through the Fish and Game Commission. And once those laws were established, then we would go ahead and operate or enforce those laws.
Okay, so you are an employee. Are you under civil service?
We are in state civil service, yes.
Okay, because we did a program on civil service. If it hasn't run yet, it'll run after us. If it's run before us, you know all about it. That's why I had to ask you the question, because I just learned about it.
All right.
Now, so that's the Department of Fish and Game are employees of the state government. The commission, Fish and Game Commission, are political appointees.
Correct.
So the political appointees set the rules that you have to follow.
Some of the rules that we follow are set by them.
Okay.
Correct.
So if they've set a rule that I don't like, I don't get mad at you, is what you're saying.
Yeah, unfortunately, the truth
You're
of
the
it
one
is,
that I see.
You're the one. Yeah, that's exactly right. We are the ones that you see. We're the most visible members of the department, frankly. And as law enforcement officers, we don't necessarily have a say in whether it's right or wrong, or you have a question. We enforce the law.
But the laws that you enforce are not as well understood by the general public as the laws of the Highway Patrol or that the sheriff enforces, because those laws everybody knows that you're not supposed to do.
That's absolutely correct.
And yours can change more often than the other ones.
And they often do.
And they often do.
And it makes it that much more difficult for game wardens, for example, because they find themselves being educators most of the time, and whether it be out in the field at the time of a citation, for example, or perhaps later in court, they find that they're oftentimes explaining in great detail the reasons behind the law or why it's significant, that this particular problem occurred.
Now, there's laws that say you're not supposed to dump stuff into the water. Now, if stuff is dumped into the water and you find it, your job is to stop it.
Right. As game wardens, that's one of our primary responsibilities, in fact, habitat protection.
Okay, now something gets dumped that's not on the list of things somebody can't dump. That nobody set a law saying you cannot dump it.
Right.
That you don't do anything.
Well, no. Much of what we do would be based on our samples and making an analysis of the impacts of that particular material.
Even though it's never been specifically designated as a no-no.
It may not be, but frankly, any materials that are deleterious, that are bad for aquatic species of any kind, would be illegal to introduce into the water.
Yeah, but if it's not listed, no, somebody doesn't know it. I can't off the time think of anything. I mean, I'm thinking, when I started asking the question, I thought to myself, well, gee whiz, if somebody dumps a container of bleach into the water, well, you put bleach into purify water. I suppose full strength it would hurt a fish, but adding to the...
Actually, bleach is very detrimental to all aquatic life, even in very minute quantities. And so it would be unlawful to put any amount of bleach in the water.
All right, then
both state and federally, it would be unlawful.
Okay, now how does this procedure go of arresting? How do you,
well, in the case of a pollution incident, for example, the first and foremost thing, if we were arriving on scene, would to try to prevent anything else from entering the water, whatever the water course is. Then we would want to secure the scene. We want to prevent the material from moving any further. In the case of a stream, for example, we would want to take samples. We would want to conduct interviews. We would want to conduct a complete investigation to determine what happened, why, and so forth. And then ultimately write up the case, explain the circumstances, have the samples analyzed, and then eventually go to court with the matter and prosecute those people responsible.
And how many of you are there in this county?
In this county, we have 5 field wardens and then 2 supervising lieutenants.
That's what I thought you said.
Yeah,
and we have an awful lot of coast.
We have 1,100 miles of coastline in California.
Yes, but you're just our county. We don't have to worry. You just got this.
Well, again, we're state officers, so we travel up and down the coast. We may reside here, but we work throughout the area, throughout the Central Coast area.
And you do have game throughout the entire county.
Yeah.
All right. Now, you have some real colorful things in front of you.
I do. I have a number of things. Yeah. One of the things I brought today was to talk a little bit about our what's referred to as the CalTIP program, and that stands for Californians Turn In Poachers. And it's a secret witness program whereby people, if they see a violation, they see someone poaching or illegally taking game, say, for example, shooting a deer at night out on a county road here, they can call us and remain anonymous, and they are subject to a reward up to $1,000 for that.
Well, how do you define poaching? I mean, how does one know that it's wrong to shoot a deer on the road? Where's the sign?
It would always be wrong to shoot a deer at night.
Oh, it is?
And especially from a roadway. There's a number of violations there, actually.
Now, where are these laws posted?
Well, these laws are available in a number of different venues, but they're found in the sport regulatory booklets that are provided at the time you go in to get your licenses, whether it be sport or hunting.
Okay, we're assuming if somebody's going to get a license and do this, then they will be told. But if you've got a poacher implies
Poacher implies he doesn't care what the law is.
That's
He's going to do it anyway. And poaching, again, would just be the illegal take of any wildlife.
Is that all wildlife, not the cow alongside the pasture from the road?
That would be another violation, another penal code violation.
But that's not yours.
Well, we would enforce that law if we saw it or we had information, that we would use to investigate that particular crime. But in general, we would focus on those crimes related to wildlife.
Okay, so this is called what is it again?
It's referred to as California Secret Witness Program. It's referred to as CalTIP as the acronym. And
where would they call you?
And this number is actually an 888 number. It's 888-334-2258.
Okay, and I think this will probably appear on the screen someplace.
Oh, okay.
Good.
In 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's somebody there to take a call.
Okay.
And relay the information regarding poaching or any illegal activity that's occurring, including pollution. So.
Okay, now we're going to take a short break, let you digest that, and we'll be right back with that Lieutenant Mark Crossland of the California State Department of Fish and Game. Got it. Be right back. We're back with Lieutenant Mark Crossland, California State Fish and Game. And during the break, somebody came up with a question, so we'll change the line. Instead of going through all your pieces of paper, we'll ask you the question, because maybe you out there are wondering too. What does one do to keep a bird, which is under your jurisdiction, like a swallow or an owl or something, from making a nest where you don't want them to do it?
Well, in the case of swallows, there's a couple of different suggestions. One, and I think it was mentioned earlier in the studio, was to put up a little decoy owl or something. Sometimes that works in some areas. But most of the time they'll use a mesh-like netting and put that in under the eaves to keep the birds from establishing a point where they can begin to build their nest. Another example, or suggestion, if you will, would be to use PAM, you know, the spray, the non-stick spray. If you spray those surfaces with PAM, it keeps the birds from being able to implant the mud and so forth to establish or start their nest. And you may need to reapply it if it rains or whatever, if that material washes off. But if you try spraying that, I think it would be pretty effective in keeping them from establishing the swallow's
That's terrific.
nest.
Of course, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, we're not advocating any particular non-stick spray. Any old non-stick spray. But that's a very good, it sounds like the cheapest way to go. Good. Okay, what else do you have for us with all this color?
I wanted to touch on a couple of things that always come up this time of year. Springtime is a pretty active time for wildlife. And we have a number of really interesting mammals in this county that are extremely active this time of year. One being the bear. And we've had a number of calls here recently about bear interactions with people, both in the campground setting and also in and around their houses, especially those folks that are living out in a rural area. So we have a website, and on our website's a whole array of information. In this particular case, I pulled this off the website, and this talks about interactions with bears and what you can do to prevent bears from getting into your garbage cans and so forth. So that's one particular thing today. The other has to do with mountain lions and keeping your distance from mountain lions and understanding what to do if you do have an interaction with a mountain lion. We have several mountain lions in this county, and I'm sure you've heard some of the more recent news accounts of lions even within downtown San Luis Obispo. Yep. So I'd really encourage people to be able to go to our website, pull down a lot of this information, and to really educate themselves about how to interact with the variety of wildlife we have in this county.
Just the fact turning and running is not necessarily the best thing to do.
No, and in fact that would be the wrong thing to do.
Okay, how about screaming?
Screaming or loud noise, in the case of a lion, making yourself appear larger. But certainly turning and running would be the wrong approach, because they will catch you
No turning and running,
quickly.
guys. We just don't do any turning and running.
No, don't run.
What else do you have for us?
I brought a couple of other booklets. One I'll leave here in the studio, and this is also available via our website, and it talks about fish and game laws protecting California's wildlife. And it's a really informative little brochure that goes through a number of the things that we've already touched on, talking about state and federal regulations and just a general overview of why it's important to have laws that protect our environment. Another little booklet I brought, and again this is available, it talks about fish and game wardens, the job that we do and why it's important, and just again it describes in great detail all of our duties. In fact, they've listed some 72 different things that game wardens are involved in.
Do you also solicit people to join your force? I mean,
we do, and that's a full-time job, really. There's only 258 game wardens currently in California. I think you mentioned earlier there was a highway patrolman on your show. There's probably upwards of 6,500 highway patrolmen in California. So naturally, most people know and have a very good idea what a highway patrolman does. Very few people, however, understand fully what a game warden does.
All right, so, now if somebody wants to ask you questions, do you have a local office?
Unfortunately, we have a local office, but it's not a public office. Okay. Our larger offices, there's one in Monterey, and there's also one in Santa Barbara and Los Alamitos. Those are larger public offices, and those would be offices people could go in and get information about licensing, ask other questions. But I would really encourage people to use our website, because I think that's a really good forum, and there's just a whole array of information there that they can draw on.
Okay, now you gave an 800 number for the tip line for the poachers. What about a regular phoning you up line, phoning your department in this county? We saw something horrible, absolutely horrible, had nothing to do with poaching, how would we tell you?
You can call the Sheriff's Department. You could call the Highway Patrol. If it's egregious enough, you could certainly dial 911. But contacting any law enforcement agency, and they would be able to put you in touch with us as well.
And that's the way you would recommend that it go?
It's either that, or you could contact our dispatch center up in Monterey area.
I see. All right. So there's nothing really, I mean, you actually work out of the whole big area.
Yeah, we work in a big area, and we are dispatched via our Monterey dispatcher. Okay. So that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I could provide that number if you like.
Well, maybe we should, just in case.
Okay. That number is 831-649-2810.
Okay. Now, do you go to schools with your message?
We do. We go to high schools, we go to elementary schools, we go to colleges and universities, and I'm involved pretty actively in trying to promote people with an interest in law enforcement, and specifically with resource law enforcement, and so we're very active with that. There's just a few of us, though, however, and so it's difficult oftentimes for us to get around to every place that we need to go.
That was a very interesting expression. You used it before, resource law enforcement, which is enforcing the laws that have to do with resources.
Correct, yeah.
As versus laws that have to do with stealing, or because poaching is stealing.
Yes, it is.
What are the most important issues locally that you have?
I would say, from my standpoint, the most important issues have to do with our marine environment. I spend a lot of time on the water, and so we're out there enforcing the provisions that govern both the commercial and recreational take of all of our fisheries. But inland, most importantly, would be pollution issues, I believe. And if I could just interject a couple of things about that, I want to encourage people to remember not to dump things down the storm drain. Unlike our wastewater treatment, which is via our sewage system, the storm drain system is totally unprotected. So anything that ends up going in the storm drain eventually gets to our streams, our creeks, and ultimately to the ocean. So the more that we can do to encourage people not to dump things down the storm drain, the better off we'll be.
Exactly. Or actually into the creeks, because they will ultimately go there too. Yeah,
and we have a pretty viable steelhead run in this area with a number of our coastal creeks. And steelhead are really a sensitive species and do not react well to chlorine and some of the other things you described. So we want to do everything we can to keep things from getting into our waterways and keeping our waters clean.
And what do you see is the biggest problem you're going to have in the future? The same ones that you always had? Do you think something is...
Yeah, without a doubt. The population's increasing dramatically, 32+ million people now in California. An awful lot of building going on, a lot of construction, a lot of use of our water resources. And so the more we can do to educate people about keeping our water clean, about the importance of working with and living with wildlife, understanding it, I think the better off we're going to be in this county.
There's no way when somebody gets a building permit to give them some brochures about the area that they're moving into. I mean, that's not part of the real estate broker's job.
Okay.
It's too bad you can't get that to be part of a real estate broker's job. That recently they made it a law that you have to have a building checked to see if it's going to stand up before the next wind.
Right.
They didn't have that years ago. They made it a law you have to tell somebody that there's a skunk farm next door. It's too bad you can't pass a law that they have to tell people that you're moving into an environment and this is how you're going to make it last for the rest of us. But they don't do that.
No, and it might be a good idea in the near future to interject at least some information about the importance of, just the runoff from our properties and making sure that we're not allowing things to get eventually through our watersheds to our creeks and streams and so forth.
Do you have anything to do with domestic water supplies, like the fact that when you put too much fertilizer on and it goes down, it sometimes gets into the underground? That's
Absolutely.
Not your job, is it?
Well, it would be in terms of pollution. So if any of those materials, whether it be poisons or any type of fertilizers, eventually enter the water in any way, shape, or form, that would, in fact, come under our jurisdiction. It would be something that we would investigate.
You have a very fluctuating jurisdiction, especially because you've got laws, rules that are set down by you to operate. I mean, rules set down things for you to take care of, which differs because law enforcement agencies or all those agencies, the law gets passed, the proposition says, now you can no longer steal this. So, okay, now we got it, or now you have to wear a seatbelt. But yours could be set by anybody at any time. Anytime this Fish and Game Commission decides to tell you to do something, you've got another one to enforce. Yeah, and it's a very diversified series of laws that govern, as I mentioned, all of the resources in California. And then, of course, for the responsibility of the game wardens to understand and be able to interpret and then ultimately make decisions about all of these issues. Really requires people that are extremely sharp and able to handle an awful lot of information. Well, yes, this is, I was going to say, it's a little different. Now, you obviously have qualifications to even become a game warden, which, in addition to the law enforcement aspect qualifications that you would have to have, there must be others you probably have to have a knowledge of these things. An ability not to get seasick. That's always also important, especially if you're going to work in the marine environment. Yeah, but certainly a minimum of 2 years college to become a game warden. In addition, 18 units of science-related background. Okay, because you don't need that for regular law enforcement. Not in general, no. But you also need to be a peace officer, so you'll need to qualify and go through all the parameters that govern our state law enforcement jobs. That's what I was thinking. Now, I suppose in cases any domestic emergency of any kind, flood, famine, earthquake, you're called upon for emergency things that have not necessarily to do with pollution. Absolutely. And we would be a part of any of the networking, whether it be for a natural disaster, homeland security, all of those things would involve game wardens at some point to assist general law enforcement. Who would you work under? Which department would you work under? I think it would depend largely on the